Hey there everyone. This video is about the relationship between circling and nonviolent communication, or NVC. I got into NVC before I got into circling. I was after a way of improving my communication. I looked at the Buddhist concept of right speech and realized I wasn't up to the job at all. It required no lying, no bullshitting, no talking rubbish, only speaking with kindness and when it's really useful. So that was about 99% of my communication out the window. So that's when I found NVC. The book, Nonviolent Communication, was one of those books which doesn't come along very often. I read it in about 5 hours, and every single page, every single chapter was blowing my mind. I became something of a devotee. I went to a couple of courses to try and develop my skills. I've tried to apply it in my relationships. And I've tried to really take inspiration from the vision of Marshall Rosenberg, the guy who invented it. He saw the violence and the suffering in the world as being caused by what he called domination structures. And I'm sort of politically an anarchist and a socialist, so that appealed to me. Structures in which small groups of people ruled over and controlled large groups of people. And he believed that in order to prop up those structures, you needed a language of domination. And that language was categorizing people in terms of what we think they are. So people are either stupid or clever, boring or interesting, servants or royalty. He believed this created a type of consciousness that disconnected us from our real, living humanity. And so nonviolent communication was his attempt to create a language of compassion and what he called a language of life. And by life, he meant the living energy inside us. He came from a somewhat religious background, so he even goes so far as to say the life in us that is divine energy. So nonviolent communication is his attempt to create a language that disrupts the logic of domination and helps us connect with our deepest living humanity. And it does that by focusing our attention on people's feelings and their needs as they arise in the present moment. And this is where it starts to bear resemblance to circling. Nonviolent communication asks us to place our attention upon what's actually happening to us, what we're feeling, what we're needing in the moment, and what other people are feeling and needing in the moment. For me, nonviolent communication helped me stop judging people so much, helped me empathize with them more, and really made my experience of living on Earth with other human beings much nicer and much happier. So I really recommend checking it out. Some of the weaknesses of nonviolent communication are that it's very clunky. Marshall Rosenberg recommends we actually learn to speak and communicate in the structure and form of nonviolent communication with other people. And that actually turns out to be pretty tricky. It's so different to how people ordinarily speak that it can be pretty jarring. People just feel like you're not responding to them in a normal way. So I found that I'm more successful using NVC if I kind of do it on the sly. I communicate using the principles of NVC, but I might not use it explicitly. I just structure my communication so that it's focusing on people's feelings, their emotions, what they might be wanting and desiring, instead of what I'm thinking about them. Nonviolent communication can also be used to gaslight people and to be passive-aggressive. Essentially, a person can use what's on the surface as very empathic communication, very compassionate sounding communication, but really they're using NVC to avoid apologizing for something or seem like they're not criticizing someone when they are. So how does nonviolent communication relate to circling? Well, I think it's doubtful circling would have emerged if nonviolent communication hadn't come before it. Nonviolent communication has had a big impact on the culture. It has provided a method by which people can try and be more empathic, but it's also offered a deep analysis of what's going on inside people and how we can connect to each other more, and what connection even means, what it feels like. Circling is built upon the ideas of nonviolent communication in many ways. There are some interesting differences though. Nonviolent communication is socially orientated. That is, it really has a desire to transform society and end injustices and end violence woven into it from the very beginning. Nonviolent communication has drawn heavily upon the ideas of Gandhi, Martin Luther King, religious pacifists from the Quaker tradition. Circling has been a lot more influenced by psychedelic culture. So a different type of inquiry, let's say, a different type of focus. NVC can be more socially orientated, more concerned with helping people and transforming the world. Circling can be more narcissistic and more inward focused. Circling can be more advanced than NVC in certain ways, in its ability to help people connect and drop into that felt sense of connection. NVC applies a fairly rigid set of guidelines and rules in terms of how we should communicate and how to build connection with each other. Circling has developed a much more nuanced and more elaborate set of tools that allows for a lot more improvisation and a lot more spontaneity. Nonviolent communication can often seem a little flat because the range of tools that are offered in NVC is pretty narrow, whereas circling, it's very broad and more stuff is being added to it all the time. In terms of my own journey, right now I'm more into circling than I am NVC. NVC is a beautiful, incredible gift to the world. It's changed my life. I will always have a very special place in my heart for it. The culture of people who use NVC is very white, quite liberal, and a lot of NVC's revolutionary vision of changing the world and ending violence and creating a better society has largely fallen by the wayside and given way to a more individualistic approach to improving your relationships and just having a nicer life, which is a real shame. But many people still use NVC with a more revolutionary vision in mind. And it has a moral commitment to justice and a moral critique of violence and domination, something that circling kind of lacks. Circling, on the other hand, is far more advanced in terms of the range of tools it offers, the different types of experience you can have in circling. Circling has a kind of narcissistic psychedelic streak which holds things back a little bit, a kind of interest in entertaining but unfathomable things like, what is the nature of reality and stuff. It's not very interested in how do we end suffering in the world, how do we address violence and poverty. So those are my thoughts on NVC and circling. There's a lot more to say, but I just wanted to offer some initial ideas. But the purposes of these videos is to just deepen the conversation around circling. So I'll say goodbye for now and thanks for listening this far.